Welcome to Creative Shadows, a video series highlighting music, art, photography, and anything that people do to express their creativity. I'm here today with Jerilyn Dufresne. Jerilyn is the author of the Darling Mystery series, and she'll be telling us about her books and talking about the creative writing process coming up on Creative Shadows. Jerilyn, thanks for joining us today on Creative Shadows. Appreciate you being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for asking.
So your book series, The Darling Mysteries, what can you tell us about it?
Well, it's set in Quincy, Illinois, and they're murder mysteries, and I had a lot of fun writing them. It's a series of 10 books. The 10th one will come out next month, I think, and because it's in the editing process right now, and that'll be the end of the series. And it's all about a family, the Darling family, but the real star is Sam Darling and her beau.
Was there people in your life who you based your characters on? Was there circumstances that you based the story on?
Well, partly yes, partly no. My siblings love to look at the siblings in the book and see who is who. But actually, there's only 6 siblings in the book, and I'm the oldest of 9. So it's impossible for that to be based on all of them. However, the idea of the family is based on mine. A very loving family that loves to play games, athletic stuff, but they also love to be very sarcastic to each other and even argue. So it was based on my family in a very general way. But Quincy is Quincy in the book, and that's a star as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Quincy is such a unique town, such history here and such tradition, especially the old homes on Main Street there.
So that's what I did. I'm glad you said that, because each book has a house or another building from here. One book doesn't have an old house on it. It has, it's an old church near Burton. But other than that, it's all Quincy architecture.
So you wrote the whole book on legal pad?
I actually did, and after a whole lot of rewriting, it did become my very first book, Who Killed My Boss. So it worked out just fine. I had to update it all the time because things change, but it started in 1995, writing on that legal pad, and it was published a few years ago. So I was 65 when it was published, so that was what? I don't know, 12 years ago. So I'm 77 now, which is why I have trouble remembering details sometimes.
So when you first started writing, was you automatically thinking, okay, I want to get this book published, or was you just writing for the joy of it?
Well, I was writing for the joy of it, but then I thought, you know what, this is kind of cool. I think I'm going to try to get it published. But back when I first finished the first draft, there was really only traditional publishing, and it was very difficult. I couldn't find an agent, no publisher would touch it, and so I put it away for a long time. But nowadays things have changed, and I do have a publisher, but she's small and independent, and it was a lot easier.
And you were telling me your book is on Amazon. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, Amazon works. I think it's a great benefit to the author. So if Amazon decides to sell a book for $10, let's say, they keep 30% of that. So they would keep $3, and the author would get $7. In my case, since I'm using a small independent publisher, we split that 70%. So I get 35% and she gets 35%. I get $3.50 out of every book that's sold if it sells for $10. So I think that's really a wonderful way of publishing. The only difficulty is, since anybody can do it, you have to kind of be able to separate the wheat from the chaff yourself. You have to be able to look at it and say, well, that's written horribly, or don't they know there's a period at the end of a sentence? Whatever. And so you can do that by getting a page or two as a sample.
So when I Googled Quincy, Illinois authors, and you came up, and your series of books came up, there was an article about your books going to the moon. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. One of them is actually on the moon already, and this is a murder anthology that I'm in with other people. So that's already there. So there's a little piece of my writing there. And this is a short story about a nun whose dad is in the mafia. And I loved that thought. I don't know where I got it.
Yeah, that's really creative.
I pictured it at St. Francis for some reason, since that's my church.
So she grew up in the mafia, and
Yeah.
she probably wanted to get away from that kind of lifestyle, and she went the
Yeah.
total opposite direction and became a nun.
Yeah, I really like it, and I even thought about starting another series based upon that character. I just don't know if there's enough there for me to do, but we'll see. We'll see.
And so the other books are going into
Yeah,
space.
not all of them, but this first book called Who Killed My Boss is going for sure, and also this first, well, looky there. This first one of 3 together called Triple Trouble. It's my first 3 books that are just put in one. So those 2 are going up. And they're going up in, let's see, it's supposed to have been November of this year. However, I think it's going to be delayed until February of 2025. So it won't be
okay.
too much of a delay.
Okay, so in what form is that going to be?
Oh, they're on these, it's so cool. I'm so glad you asked. They're on these nanofiche that are so tiny that if you take 3 dimes, and I usually bring dimes with me, if you stack 3 dimes, there would be up to 3 stories of books put into those 3 dimes on a nanofiche. It's amazing.
Wow.
And a lot of people ask, well, why would you want books on the moon? And the idea is, and they'll stay there for at least 10,000 years before they start disintegrating. And so the idea is just so other people, when they go back there, will be able to see. I mean, even if our world were destroyed, it's not going to be. But even if our world were destroyed, there will be people that will find this stuff on the moon, and learn about our culture. And the other thing is that just in case there are other people on other planets, they might find them as well. I don't know if that's true or not. I just think, well, why not? So I'm excited nonetheless.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
So your writing process, do you have a certain spot you write? Do you have a certain time? Or you just kind of write when you feel inspired?
I write when I have the time, actually. But if I get a cool idea in the middle of the night, I've been known to jump up and run into my office. I have a home office. I have a small apartment, but I live alone, and I have a home office, so I can go in there and write. This is silly, but my preference is to go to a coffee shop and write, and it's because I grew up in a big family. I like noise. It energizes me, and I'm outgoing person, you know. I'm not an introvert. I'm an extrovert, so I get energy from being around people, and so I write at coffee shops in town.
So as you're writing and you got the scenery around you, does that spark ideas as you're writing?
Absolutely, but eavesdropping is one of my favorite ways to get inspired.
Can you give me an example of something
Well,
like that happening?
One time, 2 people, it wasn't in Quincy, it was somewhere else, I mean, probably Milwaukee, but 2 people were arguing, and I wrote they were having a vehement agreement because they were arguing about something they agreed upon, but they were fighting about something they agreed on. And so that inspired me to put that in something I was writing at the time. So that's an idea, where you just listen and you get ideas.
So we talked about you sitting in a coffee shop and you've had situations where it sparked an idea. What's another idea that you've had that you kind of developed a character from?
Well, once I was sitting in a coffee shop and I saw someone riding a bicycle, and they were close enough to me that I was able to see their face. And I remember thinking, that guy looks like he could kill somebody. And I made him a villain. I described him. Of course, I didn't know who he was, so I didn't have a name attached or anything. I made up a name. But that's how I got a villain in one of my books. And speaking of names, I use a lot of Quincy names, long names that we German Quincyans know how to say very easily, but they're not so easy for other readers.
Yeah, that's one thing I've always wondered about, like with movies and authors. How do they come up with the names? How do they, decide this would be a good name for the character?
Well, sometimes it takes a while. So I might write in the story, so big hairy guy did blah, blah, blah. And then later I'll do a search, big hairy guy, and replace it with his name once I figure it out. The danger is using the same names. And in my family, we all begin with a J. So there's a danger for me to start a lot of first names with J's. And I had to really stop that.
So you mentioned to me you were 65 when your first book was published. When you were a little girl, was you writing then? And then can you explain what led you at age 65 to start publishing books?
Well, I wrote my whole life. I remember in grade school, kids doodling when they were bored. I was writing. In 5th grade, I wrote a whole lot of poetry. I'll never forget going up to the nun and saying, "Sister Paraclete, read this. This is so cool." And she said, "Well, when did you write this, Jerilyn?" And I said, "Oh, during history lesson," or whatever. So I got in a little trouble for that. But I thought it was excellent, and I looked back, and of course it wasn't. But it made me proud to have accomplished that, right? So I don't know why I decided at 65. Well, that's when it actually got published. I wrote it long before. But it was just so happens that I looked and saw that a friend of mine had become a publisher. It's a very small press. And so I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to try it. And that's what made it happen, I guess. And so 65 was my first one, and the 10th one will be at age 77.
I think you and I talked about this, how creative people are creative in more than just one way.
That's right.
I do videography and graphics. I'm a musician, and I'm also writing books. And here you are being a comedian, acting in plays and playwriting and writing books.
Yeah, I enjoy all of that. Like, I can't draw if my life depended on it. That's not one of my creative things. And design, none of that. I know what I want. I can see it in my head, but I can't make it happen. So I write about it instead.
So what kind of advice would you give to aspiring authors, especially young authors who are just starting to write?
I would say just write. Put your butt in the seat and just write. And it might be crap, and it's okay, because it always is in the beginning, at least mine was. So just write. And if you can get in a writing group, I was in a writing group of several friends. I said the only rule I had was I wanted everybody to want to be published. They didn't have to be published. I wanted people who took it seriously. So get in a writing group. Get in a reading group if you wish. Take classes. Go listen to authors when they come to speak. Just do all of these things that can inspire you to write. And you get ideas from people too, while not copying them at all, but you get ideas.
Yeah, and I think like with songwriting, or writing books, or any kind of anything that's creative, don't be afraid to be wrong.
Yeah.
And you got a spark of an inspiration for something, and you just start creating it, and you revise it, and eventually it will find its way to the finished product that you want. Is that what you found with your books?
Yeah, absolutely. You really can't be afraid to dive off the deep end and maybe break a leg because there's not enough water in it at the moment. But don't be afraid to make mistakes, because with writing, your mistakes are always correctable. And there's a thing called delete, and you can do that. And so just write and sit down, write, enjoy the process, sweat through it if you need to, but just write.
Well, Jerilyn, I really appreciate you being with us today. You gave us a lot of good information on writing and publishing. So thanks again for being a part of this.
Oh, it was absolutely my pleasure, Craig. Thanks for asking me.
You bet. And I thank you for watching this episode. We'll see you next time on Creative Shadows.